We're the most tolerant, lovely country.
Let's check out former TV critic, journalist, and now TalkRadio host for Rupert Murdoch's...
The newspaper can create great controversies, stir up arguments within the community, discussion.
What he had to say about the Express's article on 170,000 civil servants getting unbiased training.
Break it down!
It turns out that according to the investigation by the Tory MP Neil O'Brien,
His opposite who want to stop Brexit and fundamentally damage our democracy.
Yo, dog, you yelling at me right now? I know you just didn't scream on me, dog.
around 300 people in government departments have words like equality, diversity, inclusion, or gender or race in their job titles.
No, that seems perfectly reasonable to me.
And 170,000 civil servants have taken unconscious bias training courses, all of which costs us money.
We have sort of a problem here.
Ah, there it is.
Unconscious bias is that system by which you didn't think you were a racist, but you are really.
It is racist, whether or not it feels racist.
It's a way of depicting a country that is full of racism when it's not actually full of racism. It's a very strange thing, but it seems to be catching on.
Did you see the memo about this? There's no problem.
Let's talk to John O'Connell, Chief Executive of the Taxpayers Alliance. Hello, John.
Hi, Kevin.
This isn't what I want my taxpayers' money to be spent on. I mean, how is the government justifying spending fortunes?
It makes me sick.
On unconscious bias. What's that got to do with frontline governmental services?
So there's not different ethnicities in this country that need to access our public services then?
Very little. And much like you, I don't think it's how taxpayers' money should be spent.
But alternatively, it could be spent on...
paying hand over fist huge amounts to these private firms, and we're getting a really poor quality return.
And a lot of it's to do with gold plating. So you get these... pieces of legislation and regulations that come through saying that public bodies must adhere to certain equality guidelines.
Yeah, fancy term, but used well out of context.
And then what happens is that bureaucrats decide that they need to hire a load of staff to make sure that they tick those boxes.
Oh, so it's just a ticking box exercise, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, that's the point about unconscious bias training, isn't it? It is to detect racism where there is no racism.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
All right.
Let's just say it's an unproven scientific concept, Kevin. I mean, it's...
Well, many academics and much work done on the subject would disagree with that statement.
It's this idea that people are biased in their everyday activity, whether they sort of know it or not. Therefore, it's unconscious, and it just needs, somebody more worthy than you or I to bring it out of us.
Oh, so you don't need to learn anything about race equality then?
But to me, taxpayers' money is precious. We all work hard for it.
Show me the money!
And of course, if there is equality legislation that makes the country a more accepting place, fine.
So now racial bias training's okay, but only with a limited amount of people doing it.
Equality, diversity, inclusion, gender, LGBT or race in their job title. Ministry of Defence. What's that got to do with defence?
So what, different ethnicities and genders don't work in the Ministry of Defence now?
Yeah, and again, a lot of it's the scale, right? It's 45 people.
I know. That you're talking there. I'm no good at maths, but that's a few million a year in salaries, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and then pensions and everything else besides. But, if there was one person, you might sort of say, okay, fair enough. But what are 45 people doing every single day on these jobs? When there's...
That's right. I've always wondered what a diversity officer does.
Let me first ask you, have you ever met one?
Well, indeed. And again, it's just this idea that
heaven forbids, we have ideas.
My organisation has, 13 people in it, the Taxpayers Alliance.
With such suboptimal results.
That's because you serve the interests of the billionaires who fund you, and civil servants serve the public.
Bear in mind, John, also that MPs have been asked to go on these unconscious bias training courses as well. All feeds into what they call critical race theory, which is all about telling people who aren't racist that they are actually, but they don't realise it.
There is nothing good in any sense of form about political correctness.
There's also a notice board at the Houses of Parliament where white people can go and pin poems on the special board which explain how they're the beneficiaries of white privilege.
Would Kevin say the same if there was something commemorating the victims of the Holocaust or even the soldiers of World War I and World War II? Would he minimise the necessity of that?
Yeah, and it's divisive by its nature, and it's quite destructive to social fabric, and there shouldn't be any taxpayers' money spent on it.
I really am shocked.
There's a few MPs now that have publicly declared that they're not going to take this training. They're not going to be dragged there.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, each ministry, I wouldn't mind if there was one diversity officer.
So one's okay now?
Seems fair enough, I suppose, in these modern ages. But
so now you're going to make the case for them?
As you say, 41 in one ministry. The Ministry of Defence, why would they? What's that got to do with defence? And it's a sort of growing problem, I think, that we are spending more and more money on these useless jobs. And it's wasting our money, isn't it?
The arguments these two made in their talk show were purely there to undermine the necessity of unconscious bias training and the necessity for it in the workplace. It is not an uncontestable idea that racism exists or that people have racial biases. We know this from the McPherson report on institutional racism within the police and various other evidence claims of black and brown people over the years.
I can't help what I am. I was born like this. It's an immutable characteristic. So to call me a white privileged male is to be racist.
Break it down!